would you mind sharing a little bit more about those hard conversations and kind of how you're able to help us lawyers, I guess, not be the bad guy when we are talking about maybe money can't be used to buy something that they were looking forward to, because it does need to be protected?
Those are hard conversations for sure, but do it in a way so they really understand the reasoning behind it. I just don't say to them, well, we can't do that. That's not going to happen. Usually when we're going to be having these discussions, it's going to be because we have to use a special needs trust. We have to protect government benefits, and there's limits on how that money can be used in the trust. And that's how these conversations will usually start.
This is RVA Trial Lawyers, Virginia's trial lawyer podcast, hosted by Sharif Gray and Niall Abuzaki.
All right, we're back, and today we've got my friend Jenny Sciadini joining us. Jenny is a settlement consultant, and she works with our firm and a number of others around Virginia, Maryland, and the DC area, helping lawyers and their clients really maximize settlements, but not just that, do a number of other things. And I'll tell you, I first got interested in settlement consultants after seeing how sometimes your clients don't necessarily always use their settlement proceeds in maybe the best ways. So we resolved a case, a very, very difficult case, about a year ago. And I remember talking to the client a couple months later and said, hey, how's it going? Like, what are you up to? All that. And he told me he bought his dream truck. And when I heard bought his dream truck, I immediately thought, yikes, that's a lot of the settlement gone. So at that point, I was like, all right, I got to make sure I find the right people to talk to my clients to make sure that their future is secured, and that, or at least that they have options and they know what they need to do, or at least what they can do to maximize their future. So anyways, without further ado, Jenny, thank you so much for joining us. Really excited to have you on the podcast, not just to learn more about what you do as a settlement consultant, but also to learn more about who you are and your prior career as a criminal prosecutor. And then, of course, also what you've told me your most important job is being a mom. So with that, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and take a minute or so and introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharif. I am Jenny Sciadini, and I am a settlement consultant, which means I assist attorneys and their clients in the settlement process. Mainly how I help them is with structured settlements. That is the core of what I do for both attorneys' clients, helping them structure their settlements, and for attorneys for attorney fee deferrals for that case where it makes sense for them to defer those fees. But in addition to the settlement, structured settlements, I also help in various other ways. I help clients figure out whether they need to preserve their government benefits. Do they need to utilize a trust? Do they need to consider, private sector health insurance? Will that work for them? Or do they definitely need to keep their Medicaid benefits? And evaluate all those difficult situations that arise when someone's receiving a settlement, and also help them achieve financial security by utilizing a structure. I also will make connections as needed. If there's an issue that arises in the settlement planning process that I can't assist with, I can connect the attorney and their client with the proper person. And that's mainly how I help attorneys in the settlement planning process.
Well, let's talk about all that. But first, before we get into it, let's talk about a little bit about kind of who you are. Tell us, where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Maryland, which is where I reside now. I am married. My husband is a orthopedic trauma surgeon at University of Maryland Shock Trauma Center. I always say you never want to see him, but if you do, you're in good hands. We have a 28-year-old daughter. My stepdaughter lives in Nashville, Tennessee. We together have a daughter who is turning 15. She's actually about to start high school. As you mentioned, being a mom is probably one of my most important jobs and my favorite job. I just last week was waking her up at 4:30 in the morning every day for soccer tryouts. If you told me when she was 5 years old starting soccer that we were going to be waking up at 4:30 a.m. for high school soccer tryouts, I would not have believed it. But that's what we did every day last week. It worked out well for her, so that's good. She's at soccer right now. But overall, my family is very important to me. I don't want to leave out one of the most important family members, which is my 4-year-old Microdoodle. She definitely believes she is the most important family member. And that's overall. I ended up in Maryland after going to, I attended Arizona State University for undergrad. and majored in marketing and decided to stay in Arizona after I graduated, but was working in a very trendy restaurant in the Scottsdale area. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a very trendy, wealthy area. And I was making way too much money for what I did, which was serving tables. And I was finding it really hard to kind of pull away from that job and pursue a career. And one day I was just kind of standing in the service bar waiting for my drinks for my table and looking over into the bar area and saw everyone at happy hour and thought to myself, well, actually, I think I want to be on that side of the bar. I'm tired of being on this side. And that's how I ended up going to law school and returning to Maryland. I didn't really think, when I talked about being a lawyer when I was younger, I have a lot of lawyers in my family, but that dream kind of dissipated and I wasn't really pursuing it when I was in undergrad. And then I was like, well, maybe that is a good fit for me. So I decided to come back to Maryland. It made sense at that point in my life and took the LSAT, very unprepared, but did well enough to get into law school and went to University of Baltimore for law school. Initially believing that I was going to pursue a career in family law. My parents divorced when I was very young, and I thought I wanted to help families, navigate the difficult situations in divorce and could use my experience to help. But interned for a judge my first year of law school, and that judge was presiding over misdemeanor jury trials and immediately fell in love. I mean, I had no idea that these were the newbies, but to me, they seemed amazing. And I was like, that's what I want to do. And that's what I'm going to do. And that's how I ended up pursuing a career as a prosecutor in Baltimore City.
I mean, Baltimore, there are few places that can probably compete with Baltimore when it comes to getting experience as a criminal prosecutor. I mean, unfortunately, Baltimore's got quite a bit of crime. And then also, I guess, unfortunately, but fortunately, Baltimore is also known for having that amazing TV show, right? The Wire. Yeah. That by all accounts, like, not only is it just a good show, but it does a good job, I think, showing kind of what life is like as a prosecutor or police officer in Baltimore. Do you think that's fair?
It's very accurate. Actually, so I ended up clerking in the homicide unit during law school, and then ultimately went on to a judicial law clerk for a judge that was on the Baltimore City Circuit Court. And he was actually one of the main characters in The Wire, was based on him and his career as a judge and wiretaps he participated in with the prosecutors. It's a very accurate show. It's sad, but that's the way it works in Baltimore City.
So you're not alone when you say that, like, there's something about criminal law like just hooked you, right? I mean, I had that same feeling because I did criminal defense in the Army, and then I did prosecution here in Virginia before making the switch to civil work. But I know a lot of people who've done that. And there is this draw, though, towards kind of the nobility of being a prosecutor. I mean, you've got the trial work. You've got your client is justice, not an individual or an institution, right? What was it for you that was the draw that when you saw this type of work in front of you, you're like, you know what, I got to go be a prosecutor?
I think, working as a law clerk in the homicide division was a great experience as a law student, and then ultimately really helped me become a really great prosecutor, because it taught me that everyone matters. Everyone matters. Whether the victim is a gang member, prostitute, a drug addict whose addiction more than likely was a cause of their murder, or an upstanding, hardworking citizen, everyone's life matters. And the prosecutor's job is to prepare a case and pursue justice for that victim and their family and the community, and ultimately for the protection of the citizens of Baltimore City. Was it always perfect? No, not in Baltimore City, but a lot of uncooperative witnesses, a lot of issues all the time. But it did teach me that all people matter and everyone deserves, to have their day in court and have justice be served.
It's interesting, and you've probably seen this now, especially in your role as a settlement consultant, but there are a lot of similarities between what a prosecutor does and what a personal injury trial lawyer does. I mean, we're building a case. we've got a victim that we are representing. In some cases, we are looking not just for compensation for the client, but we're looking to create systemic change, right? Or to change a company's practices to make the world a bit safer. Have you noticed any of that at all? I mean, to me, at first I was like, oh no, personal injury is all about getting hurt and then finding a way to get some compensation. But the more I've done this type of work, the more I've realized that personal injury is prosecution just in the civil context.
Yeah, you are correct. It's pursuing justice for someone that's been a victim. And sometimes they overlap. Sometimes a person is a victim of a criminal crime and, also should pursue civil action as well. And sometimes it's purely one or the other. But yeah, they do cross over a lot. They're very different in the sense as the way that you're going to present your case, and a criminal trial is very different than a civil trial. But at the end of the day, ultimately, both are, in the pursuit of justice.
That's right. And I mean, we at least have a client. So we've got that victim, be it a car crash, products liability issue, medical malpractice, sex assault, all that stuff. Like, we've got a victim. And the cool thing about what we do, which is where you come into play with what you're doing now, the settlement consultant, is instead of just putting the wrongdoer in jail, we get to actually give our client, hopefully, if we're successful, some sort of compensation to recognize what was taken from them, right? Be it their health, their quality of life, or in egregious cases, punitive damages. And so I often forget that, like, my job doesn't really end once the money's transferred over. Because we spend, as lawyers at least, we spend so much time, one, working the cases, trying to get the best possible result. And it seems like at least when that money comes and the client is finally given that check, really there's a whole nother segment that needs to kind of start. And that's really where you come in, right?
Correct. Yes. And that's great that you recognize that your job doesn't just end when you give the client the check, because I hear the opposite quite a bit, which is fine. That's fine.
Now my job doesn't necessarily end. It just means I just text Jenny, and then, no, I'm joking. But please, we need to be, as lawyers, and I need to do a better job of it myself, of be mindful of, like, okay, listen, you were successful. Congratulations. Your client's happy. They have this amount of money now, but how do we set them up for success? And I believe that means bringing in someone who knows what they're doing in that world. And that's someone like yourself. So tell us, like, you get that phone call or that text message from a lawyer about a resolution or a judgment, and their client is about to get a significant sum of money. What's going through your head? Like, what are you thinking about in terms of what you need to move the ball forward for the client?
Well, typically, one of the first questions I'm going to ask is, are they able to work? Are they receiving any government benefits? Those are usually the most two important questions, because that's going to really predict what needs to happen with the settlement funds. Are they never going to work again? Are they going to be able to work, or maybe work in a different type of job that's to what they were performing before the accident or event? And then, do they receive government benefits? Because that's going to predict whether or not they need to utilize a trust, which will help decide whether or not a structure should be utilized in conjunction with the trust, or if just the trust alone is going to be the better outcome for that individual. If those questions are answered in the positive, they're never going to work again, and they're on government benefits, then it's best to get engaged early as possible with me to maintain that client's expectations. That's where I see the biggest issues. And what I do and work with attorneys is where we have a client who is receiving government benefits and is never going to work again and cannot lose those benefits, but then they hear they're going to be getting this large, settlement check, and they've made all these plans. And then I come in and tell them it's not going to, you're going to lose your benefits. These benefits are too expensive to replicate in the private sector. You're going to need to use a special needs trust and potentially a structure. Structures don't always make sense with a special needs trust. They do in a lot of situations, but not every single settlement will require both. tools.
That makes sense. So it sounds like one of the first things that you need to know, right, is are they receiving some sort of government assistance? Because the last thing that we want to do, right, is put our clients in a position where because of the amount of money they're receiving, they're no longer eligible for those Medicaid benefits, for example.
Correct.
And so that in some respects is why it is important for you to get in earlier rather than later so we can manage expectations. Is that right?
That is correct. And there are many types of government benefits that the settlement will not impact at all. And then we're going to talk just about structuring a portion of their settlement for financial security reasons. And we're not going to even worry about, trust or protecting government benefits. But majority of your clients are probably going to be in that category where if they are receiving medical assistance, it's income-based, not asset, based. But in the situation where it is an asset-tested government benefit, it's very important to know that early on to maintain the expectations.
That makes sense. And one thing that I learned, and I feel like an idiot not having known this earlier, is that you actually, in terms of how a settlement consultant is paid, it's not an out-of-pocket expense, right? It is a part of a structure, for example, or it's a commission based on the insurance policy. Can you explain that a little bit more? Because I know that's always something. I mean, us as lawyers, and I'm sure most professionals, we're getting hit up by different vendors all over the place, right? And now it's AI this, AI that, and different case management systems, all types of stuff. And there's a lot of great stuff out there, but it can be overwhelming. So sometimes when we think, oh, yikes, now settlement consultant, we're out of pocket for yet another thing, and we're not sure necessarily what we're getting. Can you explain how settlement consultants are typically compensated?
Sure, yes. And I see everything you're seeing as well. You guys do get bombarded with lots of different marketing and things you're going to need that you're going to need to pay for your cases.
Real quick, you know what the crazy thing is, Jenny? Like clothing companies will reach out to us, which I never. I mean, one, I'm flattered. They think that I could that I care enough about how I dress to consider buying special clothes. But no, I'd say at least 5 to 10 times I've been approached by custom clothing companies.
Wow.
Which I would have never guessed, right? So, but anyways.
I mean, I've heard that your inboxes get bombarded and that I should never take it personally when an attorney doesn't get back to me because just too many people are constantly asking them to use their service or work with them. But to work with me, to answer your question, costs you nothing. And you can call me, text me, email me as many times as you want. It costs you nothing. The way I make money, I don't just do this for free. I do make money, but is I get paid a commission by the life insurance companies that I ultimately place the structured settlements with. So I'm on Joanna Wine's settlements team, and we're an affiliate of Sage Settlement Consulting. And the way it works for us is our commissions are paid from the life insurance company to Sage and then trickles down to me. And it works out well for us. Ultimately, we are the way we create clients and build our clients and ultimately have individuals utilize structures in the right situation. We're never going to push a structure on someone just to make a commission, but that is how I get paid. So therefore, if you call to talk to me about a trust or about a situation, there is no charge for that. I would like you to continue calling me and continue to reach out. And ultimately, one day, there will be a good fit for a structure for one of your clients. I'm not going to recommend it till we have that situation. But when that situation arises, then that's how I get paid.
Got it. And for what it's worth, I know I'm super grateful for the case that you just assisted us with, which didn't involve a structure, but ultimately, your advice has been massive because our client certainly needs to maintain his benefits. And so thank you for that.
Well, that was a perfect example of where a structure just didn't really make sense. Not to, go into detail about it, but there is situations where they don't make sense. But then it's kind of funny that I can recommend a structure for a $15,000 minors case. And then I, sometimes can't recommend a structure for a couple $100,000. It won't make sense. In larger catastrophic injuries, medical malpractice cases, it can almost always make sense to consider a structure. But then when you're dealing with, the average settlement amount, it's really a case-by-case analysis. There's not going to always be a perfect fact scenario that's, check all the boxes and call the structure lady. This case needs a structure. It is a case-by-case analysis. Some cases are very crystal clear. You do not, need to involve me, and that would be someone that's working on no government benefits. It's the settlement they're receiving, but they seem pretty financially savvy, and it's not so large that they need to consider making a potential investment with it. Those cases, they should just receive the settlement funds and, go forward in their life. But for every other situation, it's usually a case-by-case analysis.
Something else that kind of, I guess, if we're busting this in some respects, like I used to think that settlement consultants were reserved just for significant catastrophic type cases where we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, if not millions. And I learned from you that, what is it? The minimum is like 10 grand.
10 grand.
Right. And so, talk about like your infant settlement cases where it's not a significant amount of money, but it's enough money. It meets that $10,000 threshold where working with someone like you, Jenny, it can get it into the right structure or the right situation. So by the time that minor becomes an adult, it's really grown in a way that can help secure their future.
And for minors, I would say the only exception to what I just said, that is a case-by-case analysis. For cases involving minors, I would say almost 90% of the time, a structure should be considered. A situation where maybe it shouldn't would be you have a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old and it's a smaller amount. So, the fees, because there is a one-time fee to structure.
Yeah, I want to get into structured, but before we do that, if we could we go back to like, first, the client that gets a significant amount of money who has government benefits that we don't want them to lose. Can we talk a little bit more about like, okay, practically, what does that look like? Like, what does a release have to have certain language? Where does the money go? What type of like, for example, pooled special needs trust? Like, let's do that, and then I'd love to get into kind of the more of the structural world and all that. Just so I think everyone, one, selfishly, so I can better understand how all this works, but then two, our listeners can understand like the different routes that we may take.
Yeah, no, definitely. So you have a client who is receiving government benefits, and they are asset tested government benefits, which those asset limits are going to be very low. Just so you know, SSI has a limit of $2,000, which is very low. And Medicaid, depending on what type of Medicaid they're receiving, I've never seen anything over 10,000.
And so what does that mean? Is that like, so if you get a settlement for more than 10 grand, for example, you may lose Medicaid. Is that?
You will jeopardize your benefits. Now, it's a case-by-case analysis too, because some people are willing to risk it, and you can have them, sign off on a letter stating that you've informed them that they're going to lose their Medicaid benefits for 2 months while they're over the asset limits, and then it, will be reinstated. And some people are fine with that. Although if you have someone that is receiving in-home care or on lots of medications or in a facility, they cannot afford to lose those Medicaid benefits for a month. So that's where the discussion needs to be had and typically someone that is receiving asset-tested Medicaid benefits cannot afford to lose those benefits for a month, because the amount of either their prescription medicine or the in-home care they're getting, or if they're in a facility, the cost of that facility, they're not going to be able to afford that. So those are the situations where if we're presented with that and they're receiving a large settlement, the first thing you want to do is evaluate whether a pooled special needs trust, a PSNT, makes sense, or a standalone special needs trust makes sense. And that is really going to be based on the amount of the settlement. Typically, if it's a couple $100,000, you're going to go towards the PSNT trust. And if it's more than that, if we're talking more like $500,000, you're going to do a standalone special needs trust, engage an elder law attorney to draft those documents and interview different trust companies. I recommend having your clients interview at least 2 to 3 various trust companies to pick a trustee who they're going to work with to oversee their special needs trust. It's hopefully going to be a very long relationship, and I personally believe that your client should pick the professional they want to work with. And that's how we will present it to you and your client. And then we organize all of that for you. And the settlement funds that are going into the trust can go directly to the attorney's escrow account. If you're going to utilize a structure, which that will depend on the amount of the settlement as well, and whether or not it makes sense to structure a portion to feed in to the special needs trust. So if someone needs a special needs trust, they will need to have their structure settlement pay into that special needs trust. A structure is considered an asset, so it cannot be in their name. And we would then figure out if a structure would be helpful for them. There's language that needs to be in the releases for a minor. It needs to be in the petition and orders, as well as there can be no constructive receipt for a structure in order to keep the tax-free status of a structure. So all of this needs to be decided before any releases are signed and any funds are received by the attorney, which is where we run into a lot of issues as well. We will get a call from an attorney who has accepted the settlement funds into their escrow account and all the releases are signed and ask us what to do. We're very limited at that point. We do have options. We can still pursue a special needs trust if needed. However, the structure will be off the table. They will not be able to take advantage of the benefits of structuring a settlement.
So, I mean, the lesson here is, right, like when you know that your client is on government assistance and certainly can't afford to lose it, we need to engage somebody like you early because it's complicated, right? There's so many different avenues one can take, but the last thing that we want to do is be in a position where those options for the client are foreclosed, or be in a position where the client's in jeopardy of losing those. There's going
to be some clear signs too just so you can know if your client is working and they, aren't permanently injured, they don't have any major medical issues moving forward, but they're receiving Medicaid, let's say, it's probably income tested Medicaid, and those individuals can receive a settlement and be fine.
Is there any cap? Is there any, so asset-based, there is a cap. So asset-based being, meaning like if you have more than this amount of money, but if it's income-based, you can receive whatever settlement amount and there isn't an issue, is that?
The settlement's going to only be considered income in the month it's received.
Got it.
And, so potentially, you do have to tell them potentially you could lose benefits for that month. That doesn't always happen, but you do need to inform them of that potential loss for that 1 month that they receive the settlement funds where it will be considered income. But then moving forward after that, it would not impact their Medicaid benefits. If their Medicaid is based on their income, which usually is an individual who is not permanently disabled, is working, and has probably a large majority of most of the personal injury cases out there fall into this category if they're on government benefits. But then the clear signs that you definitely need to involve me, a settlement consultant, is you have someone who's not working, has severe medical issues, is receiving some sort of Medicaid. Those are clear signs that they are more than likely receiving some sort of asset tested. If anyone's coming to their home to assist them on a regular basis, definitely if they're in any sort of facility that is government assisted, they will need to protect their benefits.
Got it. So let's transition and talk a little bit more about your clients who are getting settlement checks, who are not necessarily on any sort of government assistance. I expect there are probably now even more options for them to consider. Is that right?
Yeah. In that scenario, they can, they have a lot of options if they don't have to protect their government benefits. Depending on the amount they're receiving, they can decide to structure a portion. And typically in that situation, you would not be structuring your entire settlement unless you're a minor. If you're a minor, those are the only cases where we would probably structure the entire settlement.
And when you say structure, what does that mean?
So you're structuring a portion of your settlement. And what that basically means is instead of receiving a lump sum up front, you're going to receive a series of payments over time. And those payments are going to increase your final net that you're receiving from the settlement, because the money that you decide to invest in the structured settlement portion is going to be invested and it's going to remain tax-free, and there's going to be no fees. So, to give you an example of a recent case I worked on, we were able to turn a 300 and something, I think it was like $60,000, $80,000 settlement into, over a span of time, to almost $900,000. This individual didn't need this money right away, and it was structured out for a long period of time. But, it was lump sums paid out over a period of time that then ultimately significantly increased the final net to the client. And it's a great tool. It's, like I said, not every situation will it be something to utilize, but settlement preservation and financial security, it's always useful. Definitely should always be considered in catastrophic injury cases where your clients are going to no longer work, future medical expenses, those situations. But for the average person who doesn't have those issues moving forward, it is something to consider depending on the size of the settlement, of course.
And you come in on those cases as well. Is that right?
I do. I will assist on any sort of structured settlement on any case. As personal injury cases are called qualified cases, personal injury, medical malpractice, wrongful death, workers' comp cases. When I say qualified, I mean that they remain tax-free for the entire investment period. But we can also work with attorneys on employment litigation cases. I can assist attorneys on attorney fee deferrals, which is always a great option for attorneys to consider, depending on the way their firm is set up and the way, how their year is going. But that's a phenomenal tool that is probably underutilized in the personal injury world, for attorneys to defer their taxes in a year that maybe they've already had a really good year and it's November and they just settled a case. And instead of receiving those funds in that year, you can push them out 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, or even longer, depending on what you desire.
That's a cool tool. Yeah, I've never explored that, but yeah, I would agree with you. It's something that is not spoken about often. And so in addition to, it sounds like in addition to helping out clients, those protect their benefits, and also clients put their money in a way where it can be extended for a long period of time, you guys also help out the lawyers.
Yes.
Not with their own personal, with I guess their personal finances in some respects. The big thing to me that I think makes the most sense is that you guys are able to come in and be the experts for this stage of the case. So as I talked about earlier, like we're so focused on working up the case, getting it ready for trial, and then positioning it so if it does settle, it settles for a number that meets the client's goals. What we're not focused on is what happens after the fact. And so it makes sense to find an expert. At least I'm partial, right? You work with our firm. We enjoy working with you. Obviously, I'd recommend you to others if they're looking for help in this world. But I'm a big believer, go find the expert. And so don't make it up. Don't rely on that Google search or ChatGPT search nowadays, but go find someone who actually knows what they're doing. And someone like Jenny is that person. So, one of the things I've appreciated about working with you, Jenny, is like, you're not just talking to me, right? Like when we get you involved in a case, you're also speaking with our clients, which is incredibly helpful. One, for, just a time saving aspect for us, but two, like now I'm not stuck trying to translate all this complicated financial stuff into regular language to convey to the client. I can certainly be there to learn myself and to assist if needed, but that's something that I've really appreciated about you and your willingness to come in and have those conversations with the clients. And something that I really appreciate is you're also willing to have those hard conversations. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about those hard conversations and kind of how you're able to help us lawyers, I guess, not be the bad guy when we are talking about maybe money can't be used to buy something that they were looking forward to because it does need to be protected?
Those are hard conversations for sure. And I use my communication skills to relay that information to individuals, but do it in a way so they really understand the reasoning behind it. I just don't say to them, well, we can't do that. That's not going to happen. Sometimes I find it's really good to explain to the client, and usually when we're going to be having these discussions, it's going to be because we have to use a special needs trust and we have to protect government benefits, and there's limits on how that money can be used in the trust. And that's how these conversations will usually start. And we'll go over the reasons for needing a special needs trust. We'll go over how that works and what the money can be used for. And then I usually like, to ask, how did you want to see this money used, and see if, what they want to do, we may be able to do. We may be able to use the funds in the trust and accomplish what that individual wanted to accomplish, or we can't. In the situation we just had, it was not going to be possible. And I explain in the best way I can why that will probably not work. I usually like to look further into it, though. I mean, I definitely, know a lot about how a special needs trust can be utilized and what it can be used for. But if we have a situation where I am saying, no, that's probably not going to work out, I do like to say, let me verify that. Let me go check with some of my other resources and make sure that this is not going to be able to happen. And usually when you come back and you say, yes, that, I was correct the first time, there is no way to accomplish what you've asked us to, they appreciate the fact that I took the time to further investigate it and make sure it's not achievable. And then they feel more comfortable with the options that they have, which is how the money can be used in a special needs trust, which is very broad. You can buy almost anything, but it's the sole benefit clause that is hard. It has to be used. The funds have to be used for the sole benefit of the beneficiary, which is your client. And that can be hard for people to understand.
No, and depending on the case, it can be very, very difficult. So yeah, our listeners probably already picked this up, but Jenny and I just recently worked on a very, very challenging case on almost every level. I mean, the conduct by the defendant was egregious. The victim was truly a helpless victim. And the unfortunate reality is that our client cannot lose his benefits. And so that limits the ability for how the money can be used. But, well, Jenny, I mean, I've learned a lot through this, but I've also one of my biggest takeaways, I think, so far is when we get to this stage of the case, when it's my job to end, we've gotten the result, it's time to find an expert like yourself to come in. So that's kind of my main takeaway. And I don't necessarily think that's just for this, right? Like, I've come to believe like that's everything in life, right? Like, it's like, why try and do a number of different things when like you can just be focused on one thing, be very good at it, and then go talk to the experts, right? When you're in a different area. And that, I think, applies to trial lawyers across the board, right? If you're handling a case that you've never handled before, well, don't just wing it, right? Like, go find the people who have handled it and talk to them. Maybe it makes sense to team up, and you'll get a better result for the client. You'll learn something along the way. And so, Jenny, that's a big reason why I think our firm likes working with you, is because we know that we're going to get a better result for the client. And we can trust that not only do you know what you're doing, but you'll do that extra research to make sure that the client's aware of all the different options. But before we close up, one thing that I want to ask you is, I mean, so we had Jenny, the prosecutor, we've got Jenny, the mom, now we've got Jenny, the settlement consultant. Why do you do this work? Like, what is it about being a settlement consultant that really gets you excited about doing this work day in and day out?
I mean, ultimately helping people. I think that's always been a drive for most of my life, and anything I've pursued is helping someone navigate a difficult situation in their life. And, if what I can offer them is beneficial, that is great. If it doesn't make sense, that's also fine too. I also think, I said it earlier, what did I learn as a prosecutor and a law clerk in the homicide unit? That everyone matters. And I feel that way about what I do now. Everyone matters. I, recently was talking with an attorney in Northern Virginia about a case, and I told him if he needs me to come down, I can come down. And he's like, for a case this size? I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, all the cases matter. All of your clients matter. Everyone's important to me, whether it's a, $50,000 case or a $50 million case. I haven't had one of those, but that'd be great. But, so it's really just ultimately in the day helping people preserve their settlement funds and make sure that they are being smart and financially protecting their financial security with their settlements.
Well, this has been great. Jenny, for those who want to reach out to you with questions or to get your help with a case, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
The best way to reach me is probably my cell, which is 301-332-1031. Email, of course, is always great as well. And that is jshadini@sagesettlements.com. JSCIADINI@sagesettlements.com. And those are the best ways.
Well, thankfully, I don't have to spell that every time I email you because it's saved now. So, but have I pronounced your name right at least during this episode?
Yeah, I mean, Sciadini.
There we go. Well, I've taken the shortcut and just called you Jenny. So,
and if you mispronounce it, it doesn't bother me. I'm
all right.
Gotten over that.
I like it. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I'm sure we'll talk again soon. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. And we'll see you, of course, at the conference here coming up. And,
excited for that.
We'll go from there. So October 24th, voir dire to verdict.
Thank you for listening to this episode of RVA Trial Lawyers, Virginia's trial lawyer podcast. For more episodes, check out rvatriallawyers.com.